This is Echo 3, and let's discuss an Eeloo Endeavor. I'm starting by launching my main craft into orbit. This alone will not be enough for the mission, so we'll be adding to this craft. While I have mods like Kerbal Alarm Clock and Kerbal Engineer that can make interplanetary missions easier, I am piloting this mission without utilizing them. Instead, I have made use of Alex Moon's Launch Window Planner. I have never used this planner before, but I intend to show just how useful it is. Other mods you may consider using if you'd like are Transfer Window Planner and MechJeb. But many people play on console, so I will not be using any of those for the piloting or plotting of any of my maneuvers. If you look at the video description, you will be able to see the links to the different tools that I am referencing in this video. These really are very helpful and act as a shortcut for all of the math involved. The game has inspired me to learn more math, but in the end, it's just a game, so make sure you are having fun. After getting the primary craft into orbit, it's time to start adding the other segments to the craft. This will take 3 additional launches. I created the entire craft in the spaceplane hangar, then saved the parts as sub-assemblies so I can launch the different segments separately. These launches of additional segments are all going to start by getting to a circular 100-kilometer orbit and creating a maneuver out to the main craft. These segments are unusual though. In order to get a perfectly straight connection with the main craft, I am docking 2 ports together instead of 1. This requires a considerable more amount of precision, but should help keep the engine stable while they fire. The main craft only has a single nerve, while the side segments have 3 each. This should help keep my burn times down to a more acceptable amount, although, even with 7 nerves, this craft will take several minutes to burn to reach escape velocity. The side segments are based around a long Mark III liquid fuel tank. I added a couple of the XL solar panels and 9 large radiator panels. During long burns, the nerve engines produce copious amounts of heat, so the radiators help dissipate that. For maneuvering the segments, I have a probe core, some fuel, and RCS thrusters. Once docked, the probe core section is decoupled. I could have added some parachutes so that I could recover the upper stage. That is something you may consider in a career mode. All the launches and rendezvous were uneventful, but when I tried to dock the second fuel and engine segment to the core, only one docking port connects. I had to undock and try again. I do manage to get it the second time, and this just illustrates the difficulties of lining up multiple docking ports. In the assembly building, I had to make sure they were perfectly aligned because only one would actually attach due to the tree branch nature of the parts. The last part to be launched is the lander. I initially intended this to be a Moho lander. Although it will be just fine as an Eeloo lander, the small issue is that it only has 2 small solar panels. This doesn't end up being much of a problem, just a minor inconvenience. While Moho receives more than 10 times the sunlight of Kerbin, Eeloo will only be receiving about 0.04 times that of Kerbin during this mission. That is why the main craft is equipped with 4 RTGs. Interplanetary travel in Kerbal Space Program can seem like a daunting task for newer players. If you are playing on a computer, there are mods like MechJeb that can do most of the work for you, and if you play on console, you may wish you could play on a computer. Fear not, as there are many tools available to help players go to other planets in this game. My first time going to another planet, I went to Duna using Oleg's guide. Duna is almost coplanar with Kerbin, so it was easy. Since the phase angle for Duna is when Duna is about 45 degrees ahead of Kerbin, it's fairly easy to visualize when to make a good ejection burn. Other planets can be trickier because there's more to factor. The subreddit Kerbal Academy has links to a host of great tools for players to use. You can find Alex Moon's Launch Window Planner there. On the left of the screen, you can see a Delta V transfer plot. I am using the most efficient launch window indicated by the dark blue. Using this tool, you can plot other launch windows based off of when you want to leave and how long you are willing to spend in transit. Red indicates that lots of Delta V will be needed for the burn. On the right, you can see the details of the selected plot. I time warped to the departure date and set up my maneuver. You can see the phase angle of 115 and the departure angle of 110 degrees prograde relative to Kerbin's orbit. I have to break my ejection burns into 2 burns due to the low thrust-to-weight ratio of my craft, but those numbers still apply. This tool accounts for an ejection inclination, and you can see that I play around with the normal, anti-normal markers on the maneuver node in addition to the prograde retrograde markers. This tool says 2,056 meters per second of delta V are needed for the ejection burn, and that is pretty much what I end up using. The last part of the planner tells me how much delta V I'm going to need for my insertion burn. This way I can know exactly how much it's going to cost to get into orbit. You can also use a delta V map. The maps also include the cost of landing and returning to orbit. So my lander needs to have at least 1,300 meters per second of delta V to get my scientists to the surface and back to the command section safely. Since this lander was designed for MOHO, it is more than adequate for Eeloo. In the map mode, I will click on the closest approach marker to better keep track of my encounter. I use the maneuver controls on the bottom left of the screen to help fine-tune my approach. Before the implementation of these tools, a mod like Precise Maneuver Node Editor was helpful for this step, but now it is part of the stock game. En route to my Eeloo periapsis, I do make a couple small course correction burns so that I'll end up in the exact orbit that I want. These are very small burns and do not cost much delta V. If I were to try to adjust my inclination once I'm already in low Eeloo orbit, these burns would be more expensive. To get into orbit, I am going to set up a retrograde maneuver at my periapsis. Since Eeloo doesn't have an atmosphere to use for aerobraking, or any moon for a gravity assist, there aren't any delta V saving maneuvers for getting into orbit once inside of Eeloo's sphere of influence. Endeavor has plenty of delta V though, so I don't have to worry about the change in velocity. By separating my injection burn and my circularization burn, I can be a little bit more efficient using a lower thrust-to-weight ratio craft. I'm not going to be doing much of any way special for my landing. I want to land equatorial on the sun side of the planet for several reasons though. 1, so I have better lighting for a video. 2, so my solar panels will at least get a little bit of charge. 3, so that I will have comms back to Kerbin and can control the probe core on the lander. Lastly, it can be nice to land equatorially so that timing a rendezvous back to the command section is easier. The surface of Eeloo isn't too glamorous, so I won't be staying too long, just long enough to get a little science, then come back to the command pod. Since this lander was designed for MOHO, it's got way more thrust-to-weight ratio and delta V than it needs for a small planet like Eeloo. But on the safe side, I am going to pick a flat spot to land and touch down as gently as I can so I don't break anything. Otherwise, you then need a rescue mission to come rescue your stranded Kerbal who busted his engine belt. And we are safely down. Alright, let's save and get out, get some science. Time to plant a flag, as you do when you go anywhere in Kerbal Space Program. And we'll get back in. Here, I am going to highlight how to rendezvous back with the command module. I try to time my launch so that my lander will quickly overtake the command section and rendezvous shortly after takeoff. Note, I fly almost exclusively using the nav ball, but none of the default indicators tell me exactly where to point my craft. Since I want to decrease my relative velocity and my closest approach distance, I burn on the target side of the retrograde marker. Once I have docked with the command pod, I'm going to transfer my Kerbal and the science and get back in to the command section. Then, I'll transfer the fuel out of the lander. If my delta V budget was tighter, this could be a crucial step. Last time I visited MOHO, I would have come up just short on delta V to get home if I had not drained the fuel from the lander. Finally, I put the craft on a suborbital trajectory to deorbit the lander, so I don't leave any debris in orbit. Then, I'll quickly raise my periapsis after decoupling. Time to set up a return trajectory. I'm going to use a different technique for my return. I eject from Eeloo and set my solar periapsis so that it touches Kerbin's orbit. I'll take a minute inclination change, then burn at my periapsis to set up an encounter with Kerbin. I just need to change the period of my orbit so that I'll end up passing through Kerbin's sphere of influence. After getting an encounter, I tweak my orbit so that I get an equatorial periapsis. This part is not entirely necessary, but if I wanted to leave this craft in orbit around Kerbin and reuse it, I could. I often reuse my interplanetary crafts in career mode. I'll refill the fuel and attach an appropriate lander for the next mission. This craft is modular enough to do something like that. However, this is beyond the scope of this tutorial. It is something you can think about for your future missions, though. I fine-tuned my approach here, and we're ready to deorbit and go home. Well, thanks for watching an Eeloo Endeavor.